Welcome to Franklin Covey's Leading Through Uncertainty, the podcast to help business leaders navigate the pressure of AI and unpredictable markets with bold, creative solutions. I'm your host, Patrick Ledden, and through my research and years of experience, I've studied how disruption can leave organizations in the dust if not handled properly. Over the next 6 episodes, we will cover topics such as task prioritization, skill building, resilient cultures, and more. Because doing what's always been done won't just hold businesses back. It could hold them so far back that they feel like they're falling behind. It's time to act different to emerge different. Today, we'll discuss first-level leaders, the frontline of disruption, with senior consultant, keynote speaker, and author Victoria Roos-Olsson. Victoria, it's great to have you on.
Oh, thank you, Patrick. And it's so wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is a joy to have you here. You and I have a chance to work together quite often, and I'm just thrilled to have a chance to pick your brain a bit because I know the listeners are going to benefit. And Victoria, there's going to be people listening to the conversation today that are first level leaders. And they're saying, boy, give us some insights during times of disruption. There's going to be those that lead those leaders and even leaders above them in organizations, depending on how big the organization is. So there's a lot of people listening in, and they also know that there's a lot of pressure going on with first level leaders. From your experience, what are the biggest challenges that emerging leaders face when navigating disruption, and how can they overcome them?
You know, that's such a great and important question, Patrick. And interesting enough, so for years, I've worked with leaders and executive teams, frontline leaders, what have you, around how do we tackle and live through change and disruption. And there's this one introduction question that I always ask, and I said, what do we think of change? And very often when I work with leaders, the sort of spontaneous reaction will be, I love it, it's exciting, it's fun, it's the only way forward. And I think in a sense, that's why we kind of pick working in leadership, right? Because we're programmed that way. Now, right when the pandemic hit, I was asked to come in and work with the same leaders, all these senior executives, to help them through disruption. And I asked the same question. So very much similar audiences, and their answer was terrible, horrible, I hate it. And I think there's something very interesting in there. I think many of us really enjoy and love change when we are the ones initiating it. We just don't love it as much as when it's happening to us. And herein lies the trick for the first level leaders, because very often they are not the ones initiating this change, right? It's coming from above. So it's kind of happening to them too. And at the same time, as we know, and we've talked about previously, that first level leaders, they have the biggest sort of impact on your business results overall. So it's just crucial for them to be able to handle and drive this change. But the biggest challenge is very often that they did not initiate it. So they might not even have the same excitement about it. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think there is a difference between when you're initiating the change as opposed when it's thrust upon you.
Right.
You probably heard that expression, like nobody likes to be changed except a wet baby type of thing. It's like,
I never heard that one.
Yeah, like it's being done to me type of thing. Yeah, because we do change all the time.
Right.
That's a part of the human condition. I mean, Stephen Covey told us that, right? Of all the things you can count on in life, one of them is change.
Yeah.
And those out there keeping notes, it's also choice and principles if you're curious. But change is really a key thing. So yeah, we don't like necessarily having it done to us. So what do I do if I'm a first level leader and I know that I need to foster resilience and adaptability in my people because they're going to need to be able to adapt to changes? How can I help them to foster resilience and adaptability in my team so they can handle it during times of uncertainty?
Well, I think that's a really good question too. And I think it starts out with, as the middle manager, which you'll be for a long time, really, before you hit CEO or even beyond. A good way to approach it is to think of that you're representing the missing party, right? So when you are with your team, you're kind of representing leadership and their thoughts and their views. And when you are coming up and talking to your managers, you're kind of representing your team, right? So
Mm.
you need to have that balance, if you wish. And I think before we can go out and help our teams to do this well and to foster resilience and to do all of that, you need to inform yourself as the leader to go and maybe ask those courageous questions to your leader, like what's going on, what's happening here, why are we doing this, and what's happening. And likewise to now all the leaders of leaders that are listening in, Patrick, I think it's equally important then that you don't underestimate the importance of spending time with your more junior frontline leaders, helping them to really make sure that is it clear to them. Like,
Mm.
do they understand the why behind the what? Do they understand what's really going on and how you need to react? So I think that's step one. Before you do anything else, create that space so you feel as comfortable as you can going back to your team. And now, here's the thing, because very often when we are in the midst of change, it's busy, right? It's urgent.
Yeah.
Things are happening. So your sort of natural tendency when we are under pressure like that is to move faster. But what I would say really matters is the ability to have these smaller pauses, right? To be able to not just run through, but to stop and to pause to help your team through this, right? And I
Hmm.
find that front level leaders, you taking the time and set the scene with your team, right? And say like, okay, so where are we? Where do we need to go? And what about this emotional roller coaster of change? Because it's so easy to just look at what needs to be changed, but what we want to talk about as the leader to help people through is the emotional roller coaster.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. And a lot of times I would imagine that when we're helping them through that emotional roller coaster, we kind of forget as a first level leader, perhaps, that we've already started going through that
Yeah.
emotional roller coaster because maybe we heard about it before they did.
Yes.
So maybe we had a chance to sleep on it or something like that, and now it's being told to the team, and our natural tendency is like, come on, get on board, and they're thinking, I haven't slept on this yet. I don't know
I
what this
know,
means.
right?
Yeah.
And okay, so let me share a personal example from where this happened in my very own life. So, well, it's almost 6 years ago now. We moved from Stockholm, Sweden, to Atlanta in the U.S. And I was flying over at the
That's
time with
that's no big change,
no,
right?
right? Exactly, right? So I was flying over together with my two then teenage daughters, and they were both going to start high school here in Atlanta, and my husband was going to join us a little later. So on the way over, and I have had the pleasure of living and working and moving across many, many countries. So I've had, to your point, like a little bit more experience in that area. So on the way over, I think I just had like a notebook or something. I said, okay, girls, let's just talk a little bit about this change ahead of us and let's talk about culture shock a little bit more. And my two daughters' first reaction was like, Mom, we're not gonna have a culture shock. We have TikTok. We know what's going on in American high school. And I'm like, well, nevertheless, maybe let's just talk through, right? And so the culture shock curve is similar to the change curve, right? And but you go through the phase of like the honeymoon phase and which is like where it's all exciting, and then it's like that mega dip, and then basically you work yourself up from there. So I draw that curve with them and I discussed, and they were like, sure, they were listening, but taking that moment though was so helpful, not right then, but once we got into it. And I'll never forget, like a week two in, one of my daughters came home, and they're much more Swedish looking than I am, tall and blonde. And she came home and she's like, Mom, I'm in the honeymoon phase. Like, this is good. And she's like having so much fun. And it was like, all perfect. And we could smile and laugh about that. But then, like a few weeks later, it was really hard and there were tears and difficult. And we could say, hey, let's take a step back. Look at the culture shock. This is normal for anyone moving across the Atlantic Ocean and probably in high school, just across town, right? To have a culture shock and to go through this dip. And having that language and having set the scene in advance just really helped us tremendously once we were in it. So my point is that as leaders of leaders, help your first level leaders see this picture. And first level leaders, sometimes we feel like, okay, we need to have all the answers and know how to do this, but let your team in on this. Like, wow, this is a hard time we're going to go through now. This has changed. Here are normal emotions associated with that. What can we do as a team to help ourselves through this period?
I can picture that is a great example, and I love sharing it. I can picture you though on the plane. You know, you pull the drink tray down, and your kids are thinking,
Yeah.
"Okay, we're gonna get a soda or a snack or something." And mom pulls out the piece of paper and says, "Okay, let me draw you this chart." But the consummate professional. But what I love about that idea is as you said, like the chance to step back and recognize where you are in all of this.
Yeah.
One thing that I think that leaders struggle with, and first line leaders specifically for our conversation, is kind of maintaining that clarity and that focus.
Yeah.
When the priorities are shifting and kind of being able to put things in perspective. What can they do? Because I'm sure for some people listening to this right now are feeling that like, okay, this is interesting, really interesting, but I can't even stay focused on things right now. What can a first level leader do or their leaders to help them do this to maintain that clarity and focus when priorities are shifting rapidly due to a lot of external disruption?
So it's interesting because to maintain clarity and to maintain focus are actually two very quite different things, right? So if we think about when we stay focused, when we achieve things, we're on track, we're in the game, we're head down, right? To get clarity, it's head up.
Mm.
And I think that's like the balance that we really need to look into. And your point in an everyday life of a leader, focus would be like, okay, we're doing the job, we're checking the skills, we're making it happen, we're working through it. We might even follow up on the scoreboards, knowing like what it is that we're changing, celebrating mini success, just making it happen, making the work, there. But then making sure that we step back to regain clarity because we might be working so hard and so fast that we run in the wrong direction, and that's the danger when we are in the midst of disruption because things are changing so much that what seemed like a great direction at the start we might need to pivot, right? We need to use that, what is it called when we do the orienteering in the
Oh, yeah. Victoria and I were talking the other day about the idea of shooting an azimuth. And, right? Is that what you're thinking of?
Yes.
Yeah. And an azimuth is something back when people would use compasses, as opposed to what's, carrying your phone, you would have to figure out which direction you're going on the 360 degrees and you would shoot the azimuth. So if I'm going to go at 270 degrees, that direction, I would take out my compass and aim it in that direction, see where 270 degrees was, and maybe I'd then pick something to walk toward for a while,
right,
until I hit that point. Yeah.
So that walk towards is, I would say when we stop and do that and check the direction, there are a few key stakeholders, right, that we need to check in with. And one would be to check back into leadership. And we'd love, in the perfect world, leadership is there and they're super accessible. But sometimes we just need to put some courage in and say like, okay, what is it that I need to know from my leadership? And instead of kind of rushing in there, come prepared with a few specific questions, take a moment so that you can get what you need from them, right? Is this what's going on? Like a quick status update. Don't wait to be told or for this moment to come at you. Just be assertive, go and look for it. And then of course it's checking in with how are your team members doing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
check in, are they on there? Can they keep this up for much longer? Are they okay? And then of course the external stakeholders. And sometimes as a front level leader, here you also need, you have the responsibility, you might be very much closer to the customer, whoever that might be, like the person, the job to be done versus your leader. So you might even have a quicker insight on what is really going on, how is whatever you're doing, how does that impact the end result. So it's like your team member, your key stakeholders, and your leadership. So just constantly checking in on those areas.
Yeah, I can see that in regard to in a moment of disruption when you differentiated clarity and focus. It got me thinking about like the focus component is like I have this bias toward action. There's
Yeah.
something disruptive. I need to get, we're going through uncertainty. I need to keep moving forward and plowing forward. The clarity piece is that lifting your head up and going, okay, which direction are we going strategically? And there can be the feeling that if I stick my head up for clarity, I'm not working on,
Yes.
I'm not working, type of thing. And when it is working.
Exactly. And I think those that are successful in really managing through those disruptive times, they are really good at doing that. And it depends on, of course, the scale of this disruption. I mean, if your house is on fire, you'll want to just get into action, but still, before you rush in, you'll want to look, where is the fire coming from, so you go to the right place. So even that, it's required to have those little mini pauses, if you wish, to sort of check in on that before you go, 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 go.
So let me ask you this. So if I've been in these situations, right, where I feel like, oh, we just got to get stuff done, and I don't always lift my head up to see where we're going. I'm just moving along, because I've probably felt like if I do that, it's kind of slowing down progress, and we don't have time to slow down progress. And I'm convinced with what you're saying about, lift your head up, because that time actually going slow for a moment is going fast in the long run. But what about this? I might think, not only do I not have time to figure out which direction we're going sometimes because I'm just busy. What about things like trust? I mean, that seems like that's even a bigger lift. It's going to take more time. And when I think about, focusing on building trust, it seems like I'm really going to be slowing myself down. But I know there's a the catch-22 if I don't type of thing. So what strategies could a first level leader kind of use to build trust and stability for their people while they're going through these turbulent times?
Well, hopefully we have invested in that when we were in not such a crazy period, right? Mm-hmm. So in the best of worlds, and the more experience we get into leadership, we know that it's all seasonal and that there will be times that are going to be extremely hectic in any career. I mean, just look at our careers, right? And then there are more quieter periods. And I think it's extremely important that you've done the pre-work, right? Mm-hmm. Now, second best, like if that didn't happen, maybe your team and you're all new and here you are, then it's still really making sure that you do these mini pauses and check-ins. And think about it when we are in disruption, Patrick, like when it's hard and it's difficult and we're going through a change, very often what we need, right, is just that moment to be heard. Like even just get it off our chest a little bit. And sometimes like, all right, so building trust very often is to check in, to really take a moment, pause, check in that we are okay. And also, I'd say to say that this too this too shall pass, or mm-hmm. like this has an ending, right? And I think an advice I often give to leaders is, I mean, for senior executives, hopefully this is a little easier, but almost like you schedule little meetings with yourself as well as with your teams that like how long can I sustain this super intense period? And depending on how, it might be until Friday, right? Or like, okay, we can do 2 more months of this. Then make sure that at the end of that period already now, when you're there, that you really in your calendar schedule a time for you to lift your eyes and be ready to check in with how you're doing?
I would imagine, using that idea of checking in with yourself as you move, as you progress through your career, what you can perhaps endure, or the amount of uncertainty you can carry for a while, probably would go up, because experience would
Yeah.
show you, hey, you can make it through this, you made it through that. This too shall pass, like you said. But do you think it's important to kind of recognize like how much uncertainty your leaders and teams can handle?
Yeah.
Because there could be a sizable difference between the pauses you need to take as a more senior leader and the frequency of catching their breath they might need to take.
Yeah. I I always point out to leaders, don't use yourself as your own case study, right?
Yeah.
It's so easy to be like, okay, this works for me, or I've done this, so it should work for
Yeah.
them.
This motivates me. It should motivate
Yeah,
them. Yeah.
exactly, right?
Exactly.
Or
Yeah.
this is how I like to be delegated to. So let's do the same approach. But the truth is that we're all different. And what builds resilience, what creates there's so many different aspects to that. And you might have someone that seems extremely passionate and ready to go, but then there are all these things around. So you really need to be in tune with that as a leader. And it used to be, at least this is my experience, but tell me what, I'd love to hear what you think about it. But we used to think of like managing our time and energy as something for the individual to fix.
Hmm.
And I just feel like there's a shift here, because in today's world, our time and energy is actually some of our most important resources. Everything that we can do just to plow on kind of thing, we're not going to do for much longer. That's AI and it's all going to be taken over, right? So we need to have brain power, energy, and ability to focus. So that means we need to manage our time and energy really well. And I feel like that needs to shift a little bit. It's also the role of the leader to help your people to really find that balance. What are your thoughts on that,
Yeah,
Patrick?
I agree with that. In that, it's funny. I was doing a series of senior executive leadership development sessions with this one client years ago, and we would talk about a number of topics like communication and vision and casting a vision and working on your strategy. But the one that seemed to almost always resonate most with those most senior executives was this idea of, you were talking about there, like your own well being or
Yeah.
managing your whole self type of thing. Because they had gotten to the point where they realized that if they don't, quite frankly, they don't eat well, they don't rest, they don't connect with other people, they don't do these things to recharge themselves, it comes at a cost. And many of them had kind of burned that candle at both ends for quite a while. So I totally agree that, having seen it at that level for sure, but you're right, throughout the entire organization and helping people realize. And what do you think about this? How a first level leader creates some friction in the system that actually exhausts their team members sometimes, even in moments of
Yeah.
uncertainty. They're almost, the idea of like looking at it and saying, where am I infusing energy and where am I kind of burning it in my people?
Yes, exactly. That gain or drain, right? And
Yeah.
I definitely think that's key to reflect on. And again, like we all get energy in different ways. So it's also about asking. So maybe it's something that you get a lot of energy from, but accidentally diminishing someone else, like using Liz Wiseman's language here, right? Of
Right.
around. So just to be very aware of, but you see, going into a period of disruption. It's almost like, I mean, we've both done different sports and I've run like marathons and or half marathon. Like you prepare for that race, right? And you need like, how am I pacing myself? What is it that I'm eating? How am I going to get through it? And I think it would be beneficial for many to sort of put a little bit of a time cap, even if that time cap is it's this week or it's this quarter that is going to be very intense. How do I prepare myself and my team and even have that conversation? What are we going to do to stay focused during this period here? And of course, it's easy if it's like a big project that you're working on or a big conference that you're doing. But when it's sort of coming at you and you don't really know when is this going to end, it's like running this nonstop marathon. Like you really need to make sure, okay, how are we keeping up our energy here?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've run 2 marathons. I've trudged through a third one and I survived the fourth one. How's that? So I've done 4. And I can tell you that in the marathons, it isn't like you start off running 26.2 miles and nobody ever comes along to support you.
No.
Or there isn't any water stations or any fruit or any restrooms. I mean, there's all sorts of, even in the midst of running it, obviously all the preparation for it and all those things are really key. But even in that marathon,
Yes.
there's a lot of support, and the best marathoners recognize they got to continue fueling themselves through the entire race.
Exactly. Or you're sort of dying towards the end. And I think as a leader, then your job is not only to look out for yourself, but to look out for your team.
Yeah.
Right? How are
Let me ask you, I'm going to put you on a spot here. You ready? So I'm going to ask you to think about a leader that you think was an example of somebody who successfully navigated disruption. Obviously you don't have to disclose their specifics, but if you could think about somebody, like what did they do that made their approach so effective?
So, that makes me, so I did think about like, what are some really serious disruptions I've been through in my career? And at one point, we were working in a large organization and there was lots of things going on worldwide. And we were told that we had within 48 hours to let 300 leaders go, just like that. And like no other, more like the 300 of your leadership populations need to go in the next 48 hours. And I will always remember how the chief HR officer there in that organization managed it so well. So what they did was got a task force together, really thought about who are like the 5 senior executives most equipped to be part of making those decisions, right? So she got the 5 of us into a room, and I happen to be one, unfortunately, because of course it's a terrible thing to be part of, but nevertheless important. So she really had that, our job to be done. She really identified it. Okay, so we need to find the 300 people, but we also need to take care of the thousands that are still going to be there. And we need to prepare the leaders of these 300 leaders so that they know how to tackle all of this. So very quickly, we made like different tasks, assignments that we were working on. And of course, it was really hard. It was difficult, but it was just taking that step back, locking in that. I think we sat for almost like 24 hours, this group of 5, just dropped everything else and just created the strategy, got the plan, then invited the leaders of the leaders, gave them like, here are the tools, this is how to handle it, because redundancies are so very challenging for so many, not just for the person losing their job, and also then reminding us, and she was constantly checking back on what are our values as an organization. So how are we going to do this challenging thing still in the best of our abilities, staying with our values? And Patrick, I just thought that was very impressive. I learned a lot from her and how she just led through that whole process, really.
Well, I liked how you were walking through that and you were explaining. I mean, that's a horrendous situation, right, to have to deal with. Nobody wants to ever have to deal with that. That was certainly not the intent when they started the organization, that they'd find themselves in that situation. But how she, brought together people, came up with a plan, did good due diligence on it, communicated it well, gave them tools. those are also helpful things. What would you say to, advice would you give to a leader right now if they're struggling with making a decision? Maybe it's a big one like what you just dealt with. Maybe it's a little bit less monumental, but nonetheless, if it's one person you're having to deal with this situation like that, it can be overwhelming. So what would you suggest to them about like one thing they can do with decision making wise to help them through unpredictable situations?
Pause again, like we've discussed, and make an assessment of the situation. And ask yourself, what is my end in mind, right? So in this case, for example, it would be, okay, end in mind is, one thing is, yes, we need to let 300 people go. 2, we need to stay close and connected with our values so that the people that were let go felt respected, and the 1,000 leaders that were still there felt that they also could respect this organization. And I think that is when you're making that decision, it's taking a time to look at, okay, what's the end in mind here? And then from there, all those little micromanaging decisions, they are just so much easier. So it's assessing where are we, and then go for it. And again, it's like the house on fire. You need to stop and assess. You can't hesitate. And I think that's sometimes the challenge is either we react too fast and we go for a decision because it's so urgent, or we hesitate too much and we're from behind all the time. So it's really finding that middle point, assessing, deciding, go for it.
I love that. The idea of stepping back and assessing, being aware of the situation. It also helps you recognize, when is it on fire?
Yeah.
And when is it maybe a little bit something else that
right.
if I just react, I might react to it like it's on fire when it's actually not. So that ability to kind of step back, and then that piece around values is so critical. I mean, they have to be more than words written on a wall.
Yeah.
They have to be something that we can actually use. They're meant to be used and to lean into in the good times and the challenging times as well.
I mean, Victoria, that's the time when they really need to show up, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the conversation. I felt like I was kind of in a personal coaching session. I took a ton of notes, and thank you to everybody listening today. If you're interested in more information about how to navigate disruption, schedule my keynote, Disrupt Everything. Victoria is one of the people who delivers that keynote and does such an excellent job. And, the keynote itself is based on my personal groundbreaking research at Vanderbilt University and the book of the same name, co-authored with James Patterson, the world's best-selling author. You can use it for teams and organizations and individuals as well, not just to survive, but to profit from disruption. So for more details about this or anything Victoria shared with on the show today, check out the show notes and also the links that you can find in them as well. And thank you again for joining us for this episode of Leading Through Uncertainty. I'm Dr. Patrick Ledden. Now go make it a great day.